Hi, I'm John, and this is an introductory guide to SPSS. In this video, we'll focus on just the essentials: navigating the SPSS workspace, creating variables, and entering data. Once we've covered the basics, we'll move on to running some standard statistical tests in subsequent videos. SPSS is a statistical analysis software package and often used in fields like education and psychology, but it's applicable in many others. Originally, it stood for Statistical Package for the Social Sciences, and it was first developed in 1968 to help researchers in areas like sociology and psychology. But since being acquired by IBM in 2009, it's now referred to as IBM SPSS Statistics, and it's used far beyond the social sciences today. If you are new to SPSS, here's how to begin. Open up SPSS on your computer, and the first thing you'll do is dismiss the splash screen that appears. And SPSS, I'll be working with version 29. However, the steps will look familiar even if you're working with an earlier version. Any version of SPSS offers two primary views: the data view and the variable view. And in the data view, where we are now, you'll see a spreadsheet-like interface where you can input numbers. Each row corresponds to a participant, subject, or case, where each column then represents a specific variable. Let's try entering a few numbers. And you can see that as I enter the number, the variables are automatically assigned a name, like VAR 00001, VAR 00002. And that's nice, but if you have many variables, that can get confusing pretty quickly. So to avoid that, we'll change the names in variable view. To switch to variable view, I'm going to toggle down to the bottom of my screen to the tab that says variable view and click. And in variable view, I can see all of my variables displayed in rows, and then all of their properties displayed across columns. Let's start by giving the variables some meaningful names. In SPSS, you can name variables almost anything, but there are a few restrictions. You can't use spaces, most special characters, or start a name with a number. So just to show, if I tried to add a space, or if I tried to add a number at the beginning, right? So in the cases where you would want to separate words, you can use an underscore, or you can try camel case. So an underscore, variable underscore red is acceptable. Or camel case is no space between the words, but each word is denoted by the capitalization of the first letter of the word. For our purposes, I'm just going to name the first variable ID, followed by gender, height, and weight. To add more context, we're going to use the label column. Labels allow you to describe each variable in greater detail. For instance, instead of just ID, we could further say that this is an identification number. We could then say that height is in inches and weight is in pounds. Next, you'll need to adjust the type of variable. However, by default, SPSS sets the type to numeric, which works for most cases. However, if you need to input dates or currency, you can change the type accordingly. In most of our examples, the numeric option is appropriate. Another key setting is the measure property, which determines the scale of measurement for your data. You've probably seen these terms: nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio in statistics, describing types of data. In SPSS, these are simplified to nominal or categorical, ordinal, and scale. And scale combines interval and ratio data. So for categorical data like gender, we'll select nominal. And for continuous data like height and weight, we'll use scale. There are additional properties you can adjust, such as width, decimals, and you can adjust the column width manually by dragging. Width specifies how wide your string entries can be, but since, again, we're mostly working with numeric data, we won't need to modify that. Decimals control how many decimal places are displayed, with 2 being the default. For nominal variables like gender, decimals aren't necessary. But for scale variables like height and weight, it's often helpful to show multiple decimal points or places. In data view, you can adjust the width of the column by dragging it again manually. And that's useful when working with larger data sets where you might need to make the columns wider for better visibility. If I go back to variable view, the align setting lets you decide whether your data is left, right, aligned, or centered. And if I were or wanted to create a new variable in variable view, I would simply give it a name. Give it a label. Adjust the decimals if needed, and set the appropriate measure. You can leave most of the other settings at their default values. And if you want to delete the variable, just select it and choose the clear option. I did that by a 2-finger tap or a right click on a mouse. Now that you've learned the basics of SPSS, creating variables, renaming them, and adjusting their settings, you're ready to move on to entering your data and running some simple analyses.